Welcome back to the Joust About Careers podcast. This is the place to learn about careers from the people who are actually doing the work every day. I'm your host, Brian Bratt, and this week's guest is 2010 Van Buren graduate Michael Flanagan, a civil engineer for the City of Thornton, Colorado. In this episode, Michael shares how a typical day looks as a civil engineer, how the first-year engineering program at the University of Cincinnati helped him decide what kind of engineer to become, how the soil in Ohio is much different from the soil in Colorado, and much more. Whether you are interested in a career as an engineer or are still exploring your options, I hope that what Michael shares today will help all of you make better career decisions and have fulfilling career journeys. Enjoy the show. Michael, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'd like to start by just hearing, how does a typical day look for a civil engineer for the City of Thornton, Colorado?
Yeah, sure. Well, happy to be here. My typical day as a civil engineer for the city is I primarily am tasked with reviewing the construction and design plans for any new developments that come into the city. So there are, I guess, two avenues in municipal public government. One is what people typically think of, which is infrastructure. So maintaining the roads, the water and sanitary sewer systems, taking care of when rain happens or snow happens, where does all that water go? That's the infrastructure side. So maintaining all of the existing systems and adding things that are identified as problems, adding new facilities to address that. So that's not what I do. What I do is any private money that comes into the city. Someone wants to build a new warehouse, a new restaurant, a big housing subdivision, any of that, the developer has responsibilities to build the public infrastructure and follow our standards and our city code requirements to essentially service anything that they're bringing in. So obviously, when a new residential subdivision is constructed, you need water and sanitary sewer and drainage systems that address all of that coming in. So it's the developer's responsibility to construct all of that. As a part of that, my job is to review the consulting engineer for the developer does the design. I review everything to make sure that it meets our standards, our city code, state and federal requirements. More generally, just that it's best practices in engineering, that they're not accidentally copying information that doesn't necessarily apply, or once in a while, because I worked in the private sector as well, you got to start with something. So like template information that might be another city or something like that. My job is to make sure all of the information they're providing us is applicable and correct and uses all the best practices, meets all of our requirements, and generally is not going to cause issues that then our infrastructure department has to correct in the future. Because what we don't want to happen is that some new development comes in, everybody's excited, new restaurant or something, and then in 5 years it becomes a huge expense for the city because something went wrong in design.
Right.
So generally I partner, and we try to act as partners. Sometimes developers or consulting engineers probably don't think of us as partners, more as roadblocks to the development process, I'm sure. But we try to partner to end up at the end of the day with the best product, the best development, that is of mutual benefit to the current citizens, the future citizens, and the city in general.
So are you sitting at a computer most days looking at those plans? Are those plans physical paper blueprints? Are you going out and visiting the sites? How does all of that look?
I do go out and visit sites occasionally. Typically, that's it toward the end of the process. So the the private developer and their team submits various packages. So when I mostly get involved and when I project manage the package, it's in the construction design phase. So it is a very detailed. Essentially, you can take that, hand it to the contractor, and the contractor should be able to construct the entire project outside of the actual structure of the building on site. If we're talking like a large commercial site, like if a new mall was built in Finley, I would be the person that is reviewing everything from the facade of the mall out to the property lines. When they submit with all their associated design reports and everything like that, I primarily do work in front of a computer. We use a PDF editing software called Bluebeam that's very ubiquitous through the engineering and architecture community. And I basically go through and I mark up plans and the PDFs and everything. And then at the end of the process, we send them back and say, all right, these are our comments. Please address them and resubmit. So it's a cyclical process. At the end of the process, we hopefully have no further comments, and then they can move into their actual construction. At the end of construction, I will go out we have different staff that do inspections throughout the entire construction process. I go out at the end to walk the whole site to make sure that I don't see anything that doesn't match up with the plans or we didn't catch in the plans, like a light pulls right in front of a stop sign accidentally. So the stop sign or the light pole needs to move. Little stuff that you don't necessarily see on a 2D sheet of paper.
Right.
We haven't worked with paper plans in quite some time. In the 3 years that I've been with the city, it's been all electronic since prior to that. It is a much faster way to get things across because you're not waiting on mail deliveries or passing around a set of paper plans. But yeah, generally I am in front of a computer for the entirety of my workday, outside of a plethora of meetings. I have a lot of meetings, but that's how we communicate across all of the different parties that we have. So
now, thinking about Thornton, Colorado, is that a big city? Is that a suburb of Denver? I really know nothing about it, but your picture at the top of your LinkedIn, I mean, nice, beautiful shot of mountains with snow. And what can you tell us about Thornton?
Thornton it is a suburb of Denver. It is also a large city. The Denver metro is about 3 million people. So the metro being all of the suburbs around like the immediate vicinity of Denver. Thornton is actually the 6th largest city in Colorado. It's about 3 times the size of Findlay. 140,000 people as of a year or two ago. Ultimately, our anticipated population when Thornton's completely built out, there's a lot of land that's not anything built on it right now. I want to say our ultimate population is just under 300,000. So it's pretty big. It's like I said, it's the 6th largest city in Colorado, but 4 of the 6 top cities by population are all suburbs of Denver, including Denver. But yeah, Denver's big, but Thornton is the immediate northeast suburb.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you were driving out of downtown, you probably wouldn't know you had left Denver. But it's right there. It's kind of like all of the suburbs of Cincinnati,
Right.
where you don't really know that you left Cincinnati. But it used to be more independent
Okay.
prior to just urban sprawl kind of merging everything.
So are you the only civil engineer that worked for Thornton, or are there multiple?
I am not. I am on a team of 6 engineers, so I am one of 6, and then our manager is also an engineer, and that's just for the development side. On the infrastructure side, I couldn't tell you. There are at least 30 engineers, and I am probably significantly underestimating that. Um, we joke with our infrastructure department that we build more utilities than they do because development goes much faster and has a lot more funds behind it than the city needing to balance budget for ongoing maintenance activities. But a lot of the work that we do is partnerships with consulting engineers where independent, privately owned civil engineers do all the drafting and the plans and preparation and the calculations, and then we're more of a check.
When you were a senior at Van Buren, did you foresee yourself being a civil engineer for a city in Colorado? What were your plans at that point?
Definitely not a city engineer. When I was a senior, I had the typical you're good at math and science, you should look into engineering. I feel like that's a very common story, a very common way to get into engineering. I didn't really know what kind of engineering I wanted to get into. I kind of knew that construction was interesting to me. When I did shadow day, I shadowed an architect. I found out that was quite a bit too artsy for me. I was never good at the drawing side of art. I was more into music. But as a senior, I that was basically where it stopped. I knew that I probably wanted to get into engineering and didn't know where to go from there. Didn't There's so many different fields of engineering that I just was overwhelmed, honestly. So when I was looking at schools, 2008 had just happened. I graduated in 2010. So 2008 economic downturn, very hard to find jobs. So I looked at universities that had really solid internship or co-op programs. Ohio Northern, Ohio State, and Cincinnati were my kind of top 3. But Cincinnati won out because of the structure they have. You get your 4-year engineering degree in 5 years, but you also have 5 semesters of cooperative education. So paid internships where you're just a full-time working student. You don't have classes or anything that you need to take. And then they guarantee, as long as you don't fail classes or miss requirements, you're going to graduate in 5 years. Whereas at the time, the other universities I looked into were more, you can probably find something. It might set you back on your requirements if you miss a class that's only offered once a year. So the other thing that really took me to Cincinnati, which goes to my not understanding what field of engineering I wanted to go into, and they still have it. I looked up, they have the first year engineering program at Cincinnati. Engineering, no matter what major you're in, you're pretty much going to take the same classes your first year: calculus, physics, probably some sort of English class, a writing class. Because of that, Cincinnati offers, for either you didn't get in because aerospace engineering, for instance, is extremely competitive. So maybe you didn't get into engineering for aerospace specifically. Or like me, you don't understand what the nuances are between mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering, or civil engineering and architectural engineering. They're very close. So what I did was the first year engineering program is essentially undecided, but in engineering. So you know engineering is what you want to do, but you don't really know more than that. What I had was an extra class. It was just, I think it was 1 hour each week. And they brought in, for the whole semester, they brought in all the different programs and seniors or people working in the field to basically explain exactly what you're doing here, honestly. It's all right, this week is biomedical and mechanical. Like, explain to us what those are, what student groups exist in that field specifically. Aerospace had some sort of like Formula One car a go-kart that they were building as a student group, and they'd race it in a competition against other universities every year. Civil engineering had a concrete canoe competition. So interesting stuff like that. But as I was introduced to those different fields, I realized I started comparing things after civil engineering to civil engineering because that was sparking my interest the most. So then I internally transferred, I applied, but it was a very simple process. And I applied to join the civil engineering class. So then from that point forward, and I think we were on quarters at the time. I think I joined in spring quarter. I moved into civil engineering. So from that point forward, I was part of the civil engineering class. Okay. But it really helped me identify and have confidence that I was in the right major within engineering itself. So that really helped me move from high school into, okay, engineering, but what? And then into civil engineering, which has worked out.
Good. And I think, yeah, there are so many types of engineering. Like, you mentioned architectural engineering. Again, not something a high school student is going to think about. So if schools could make them aware of all those opportunities, that is huge. Now, you went on to get your master's degree at North Carolina State University with a specialty in geotechnical engineering. I'd love to know why North Carolina State University, because obviously, that isn't where you got your undergrad. You're working in Colorado. You're getting your degree on the East Coast. How did that come about? And tell us about that geotechnical specialty and maybe why that is significant living in Colorado.
Yeah, it was a heck of a commute to North Carolina. No, I was looking into master's programs kind of at the end of my undergrad, but decided I didn't really know enough. During my undergrad, I worked for Messer Construction and for Hazen and Sawyer, who's a wastewater and water engineering firm. So I had samples of construction and environmental and water. But both of those were kind of not what I was looking into. I liked my geotechnical classes the best. And so after working for a couple years and wanting to further that, I only got, I think, 2 or 3 classes in that specialty area. So I felt like I had a lot more to learn. So I ended up doing 1 class per semester for about 4 years. It was difficult, but my employer also paid for a portion of that just as a benefit, tuition reimbursement, which is pretty common. A lot of employers have something along those lines. It might not be 50%, but North Carolina State was the choice of school because in 2017, so pre-pandemic, they had a really well-established, had been doing it for 15, 20 years, a fully online, never show up to campus, no expectation that you're going to come in for the final exam program. And there were a couple schools at that time. It's way more common now. But at the time, it was a very well-established program that I could do whether I was traveling for work. I traveled a lot in the private sector to middle of nowhere places that internet connections were definitely not a guarantee. So the way the courses were structured, it helped because all I needed to do was watch the lecture by the time the next lecture came up and have my homework done by the next week. So it allowed me to have the flexibility to work. Sometimes I was working 60, 70, 80 hours in a week out in the field, in the middle of Texas. I was in Texas a lot. So by the time I'd get back to my hotel and clean up, have some dinner, I needed to be able to have that flexibility rather than I have to be back at my hotel room at 5 o'clock because my lecture starts.
Right.
That wasn't a requirement. So I went through the program. In the middle of that, COVID happened. It was convenient because I was already on a fully online platform. There was no hiccups when it came to how do we get to a fully remote situation. So I didn't really see any disturbance when it came to COVID interruptions to my master's program. But my geotechnical specialty, I kind of specialized primarily in geotechnical and then a bit in construction because that's where I was at the time. Geotechnical engineering is one of the 5 specialty areas of civil engineering. There's structural, which is buildings like above ground, especially like buildings and bridges. Transportation, which is design of roads, highways, traffic, congestion, all of that stuff. Water environmental, which is design of water, wastewater, drainage, all of that stuff. And then construction, which is basically your materials and your methods to take all of the aforementioned stuff and actually make it a reality, take it from paper. So out of those 5, geotechnical was my interest area. And I deal with, at the time, I dealt with investigating the soil and the rock under the ground to then take that and provide recommendations or design for things like building foundations, retaining walls, pavements, dams and levees. I did a lot of work in the renewable sector, so doing solar panel foundations, wind turbine foundations, and basically taking samples of soils or rock, depending on where you are in the country or locally, you can have a lot of variation. Basically taking that and trying to dial in on this. If you dig 3 feet and you put your foundation right there, how much load, how much pressure can that foundation take? And what we really see is, and especially in Ohio, it's very typical to just do spread foundations, which is you dig down and you pour a foundation and then you go on up. That's because the glaciers from the Great Lakes came down millennia ago and compressed all the dirt. And so compressed all the soil so it can take a decently high load. Geotech out in Denver, out in Colorado, is pretty challenging because we have expansive soils. So if you add water, they puff up. When you construct a building, you're disturbing the natural soil formation on top, which can, in a lot of situations, encourage water to get places it's never been before or hasn't been as plentiful as it might be. So expanding soil and expanding bedrock is a huge issue out here, to where even the state has materials for homeowners when you are buying your first home to be aware of, because if your soils expand, and especially if they expand differentially, where some puffs up none and some goes up quite a bit, typically buildings don't like it when your foundation goes like this. So that can result in cracking of walls, degradation of pavements, stuff like that. So it's a pretty underappreciated field. It's complex, and as a result, it can get expensive really fast to have construction remedies to fully address that. So everywhere there's going to be some risk when it comes to any design, because anyone can build a bridge. An engineer can tell you how to build a bridge that barely stands up. Like that's the fun thing that my professors always said. It all comes down to cost. I can make your house not move at all whatsoever.
Right.
But you're not going to want to pay $1 million for a 1,500 square foot house. So how do we find the balance between economics and life, health, safety? So my first charge as a licensed engineer, my first charge is life, health, safety. But then it's, all right, how do we get satisfactory life, health, safety risk while not completely bankrupting any project that has to happen?
Right. Well, Michael, you have definitely shared a ton of information, and that's really interesting, how the soil is so different and how the glaciers impacted that in Northwest Ohio. And yeah, that's really, really interesting. So as we wrap up, as you think about what you know now about careers and think back to what you knew as a high school student, what do you know now that you wish you had known when you were in high school?
Two things. First, I did not realize, and I'm not just saying this because you're the English teacher at Van Buren. I did not realize how much writing I would be doing as an engineer. Everyone says math and science, engineering's your field. As a result, all the engineers in the field of engineering, it's kind of taken for granted that you can do the math and science. That's nearly 100% of my classes were math and science. I took 2 writing classes, one general English class and one technical writing class. And that was it for my writing in college. When I got into the professional field, though, if you can't write well, and in my field, it's well is technically and concisely. Like, you need to be able to communicate your recommendations, communicate your findings. You need to be able to do that in a way that people that aren't engineers can understand, and not use 1,000 pages to do it. So being able to dial in and write clearly and concisely in a technical way that actually gets your point across, instead of just elaborating and going on. That is absolutely critical. So depending on the assignment, I guess, the more applicable writing assignments for engineering are typically the ones that you set with a page limit, not a page minimum. So getting all that information and really dialing it down to what actually matters, and give me as much detail as I need but not all this extra stuff.
Okay.
So that's probably my engineering specific one. Generally, what I did not realize is how important hobbies outside of my major or specialty area would be. I mentioned I worked 50, 60, 70 hours in the private sector, especially. In the public sector, my current job, I don't typically have those overtime hours. But I got really burnt out because I was working so much. And so even in college, having groups or passions or just things to do outside of that specific engineering focused everything, for me to mentally reset helps with burnout so much that it's very critical to give yourself that mental break. So, I mean, I have more hobbies than I can count. But in college, there are so many student groups associated with your major, of course. But I was involved in a group called Rally Cats at University of Cincinnati that was just a group of friends that we went to all the sporting events at the university. And the big ones, football, basketball, sure. But we went to like the women's soccer games and the lacrosse games and all the little stuff too. And it was just a great way to disconnect, mentally reset, not be able to think about engineering specifically. And that really helps with the mental disconnection and recovery. So that's absolutely critical to success.
Well, Michael, very, very insightful. Have you had much snow so far this fall, winter?
Not a crazy amount. We kind of had 3 or 4 days in a row at the beginning of November that kind of just, it snowed 1/10 of an inch every hour.
Okay. Oh, wow.
For like 4 days. But then it was slow enough that it was still melting off. What people don't realize about Colorado is that I can see the mountains from work. I can see them from my house, but they're like an hour and a half drive away, and they get pounded with snow.
Yeah.
But down here, we have 30 or 40 degree temperature swings. So by the time the snow finishes and the sun comes out, the roads melt off right away. So it's no issue at all. It's like the best of both worlds. So,
well, very good, Michael. I really appreciate it. Sounds like you're doing really well in your career, and good luck. And I hope some people will reach out to you if they have questions. And if you ever need anything, please let us know, because we know that our graduates are doing great things, and we really appreciate that. So good luck as you continue your career journey.
I appreciate it. Have a good one.
If you liked this Joust About Careers episode, you can explore previous episodes and highlights to learn about even more careers of Van Buren graduates. To be sure you don't miss upcoming episodes, please click subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform so you'll know when the next episode is released. Thank you for spending a portion of your day with us, and we hope you will continue to prepare for your future by learning just about careers.